All right, welcome to Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 21. We're going to go to 21. So we're going to cover a fair bit of text, but it's going to be a lighter teaching. I'm going to give you some commentary along the way, and we're going to look at two principal accounts here. The first one is regarding Herod, who's the tetrarch, where Jesus is doing ministry. And Herod hears about Jesus and kind of has this panic attack, thinking that Jesus, is John the Baptist, risen from the dead. And the reason that freaks Herod out is because Herod killed John the Baptist. So he's a little paranoid. So we're going to see that account, and Jesus moves on beyond the region because of that. And then we see the account of Jesus feeding the 5,000, which is a pretty popular account in the scripture. It's one of his more famous miracles. It's recorded in all four Gospels. So we're going to be touching on that a little bit as well here in the book of Matthew. So why don't we go ahead and read the text? Beginning in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 1. In that season, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus. And he said to his servants, "This is John the Immerser. He was raised from the dead, and because of this, the powers are operating in him." For Herod, having laid hold of John, bound him and put him in the prison on account of Herodias, the wife of Philip his brother. For John was saying to him, "It isn't permissible for you to be having her." And wanting to kill him, he feared the crowd, because they were counting him a prophet. But during Herod's birthday party, the daughter of Herodias danced in the midst, and she pleased Herod, from which he confessed with an oath to give to her whatever she might ask. But she, having been prompted by her mother, said, "Give me here upon a platter the head of John the Immerser." And the king sorrowed because of the oaths, and those reclining with him, he ordered it to be given. And having sent, he beheaded John in the prison, and his head was carried upon a platter and was given to the girl, and she carried it to her mother. And having approached, his students took up the body and buried it. And having gone, they reported it to Jesus. And Jesus, having heard, withdrew from there in a boat for a deserted place in private. And the crowds, having heard, they followed him on foot from the cities. And Jesus, having gone out, saw a large crowd and had pity on them and healed their sick. But it having become late evening, his students approached him, saying, "The place is deserted, and the hour already gone by. Dismiss the crowd, so that, having gone away into the villages, they may buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They don't have need to go away. You give them something to eat." But they said to him, "We aren't having anything here except 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." And having ordered the crowds to recline on the grass, having taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, having looked up into heaven, he blessed, and having broken them, he gave the loaves to the students, and the students to the crowds. And they all ate and were full, and they took up the excess of the fragments, 12 full baskets. But those eating were about 5,000 men, apart from women and children. All right, that's how far we're going to get in the teaching. May God bless the teaching. So back to verse 1, in that season. And so that season of Jesus's life, Jesus is doing ministry. And previously in chapter 13, he just got done telling a ton of analogies about the kingdom of God. And chapter 13 also tells us that Jesus intentionally began using analogies to hide the truths of God from those who weren't truly interested in it. But it was designed in such a way that if you were a disciple and wanted to know the truth of God, you could figure it out. You could approach God, Jesus, and ask him for an interpretation, which he does do a couple of times in Matthew 13. So in that season, in that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus. So Jesus is getting really famous at this point, and some of the higher-ups, the authorities, begin to hear about him and take notice of him. And one of them is this man named Herod. Herod is an evil man. In verse 2 it says, "And he said to his servants, 'This is John the Immerser. He was raised from the dead, and because of this, the powers are operating in him.'" So Herod hears the report about Jesus doing all of these miracles. And then he says this pretty irrational thing. He tells his slaves, his servants, this is actually John the Immerser risen from the dead. And now John the Immerser and Jesus are two different people. Why does Herod think that? Well, in verse 3 it says, "For Herod, having laid hold of John, bound him and put him in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of Philip, his brother." So now we're going to get an account here. Matthew is saying Herod heard the report about Jesus and kind of panicked and made this assumption that Jesus is the risen John the Baptist. And now Matthew's going to explain why Herod thinks that. So we're going to get a mini account here on why Herod would have that strange paranoid thought. Well, you have to go back in time a little bit. Not too long ago, in this account, Herod took John the Immerser and put him in prison. And the reason why is because Herod married his sister-in-law. So Herod had a brother named Philip. Philip married this woman, and for whatever reason, this woman left Philip and ended up with Herod. And that's an immoral relationship according to the Mosaic law. And John the Immerser calls Herod out on this. So in verse 4, it says, "For John was saying to him," Herod, "it isn't permissible for you to be having her." So John is a very bold man. If you know John the Immerser, he's really not afraid to call people out on their sins. And he doesn't do that in a Pharisaical, judgmental way. He doesn't jump to conclusions. He isn't. He does not do it in an inappropriate way. But he was a prophet, and he was called to prophesy to the nation of Israel. And a part of that was calling them to repentance from their sins. And so you do see him in a more maybe confrontational attitude than you would other individuals. And John was not afraid to call people out on their sins, even if they were a high-ranking authority like Herod. Well, Herod, his now wife, Herodias, she's the one who really seems to take an issue with John over this. She's the one who's frustrated with John. She's the one who wants to hurt/kill John over this. So she makes Herod use his power to put John in prison. Let's look at verse 5. In wanting to kill him, he feared the crowd because they were counting him a prophet. So Herod actually wanted to kill John the Immerser, but he would only imprison him. He wouldn't kill John because he was afraid of losing popularity. The people, the Israelites, viewed John the Immerser as a genuine prophet, and rightly so. So for that reason, because of the fear of man, Herod didn't kill John the Immerser. So it's kind of interesting. The fear of man works both ways. The righteous believer shouldn't have fear of man. That can, it's always a snare, the book of Proverbs tells us. But one of the interesting things is not only can believers or righteous people have the fear of man toward the wicked or the non-believer, but conversely, the non-believer can have the fear of man. They can fear other non-believers or believers, and that can be a snare for them. And it seems that Herod succumbing to the fear of man, that conveniently spared John's life, at least for a period of time. Verse 6, but during Herod's birthday party, the daughter of Herodias danced in the midst, and she pleased Herod. So John's in prison. Herod won't kill the man. And now there's an opportune time. This event comes along, and Herodias is going to take advantage of it to kill John the Immerser. So Herod throws a birthday party, and he invites other officials, and Herodias's daughter dances there. So that would be Herod's niece. So this is kind of a really inappropriate thing. This is a younger woman who's dancing sensually in public, and then not only that, but her uncle, now father through marriage, is pleased with it. So this is kind of a disturbing and disgusting scene. But Herod is pleased with Herodias' dance during his birthday party. Verse 7, from which he confessed with an oath to give to her whatever she might ask. Back in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, 5, 6, and 7, we talked a little bit about oaths. And Jesus says, do not take an oath. And this is one of the examples that I gave during that teaching, just to show you how detrimental an oath can be. When you make an oath, you just don't know the future. You don't know circumstances. You don't even know yourself well enough. And so when you take an oath, you're gambling something away that you very well and easily could lose. And that's what's happening here. Herod, he kind of has this emotional reaction and maybe doesn't think through it all the way, but he says, I'm going to swear an oath to this girl. And he says, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. And I don't think it's here in this text, but in a different gospel, it says, whatever you want, up to half my kingdom. And that is pretty preposterous when you think about it. Like, you would give away half of a kingdom to a girl who's your own relative who danced seductively for you. It's pretty crazy, and just shows you the depravity that Herod has fallen to. Verse 8, but she, having been prompted by her mother, said, give me here upon a platter the head of John the Immerser. So here's where Herodias comes in and takes advantage of this golden opportunity to finally kill off John the Immerser, who keeps telling me that, my husband shouldn't be with me, and I want to be with Herod, and I want to maintain my power and status, and quite honestly, I just don't like when people tell me that I'm doing something wrong. So Herodias takes advantage of this situation and tells her daughter, hey, ask Herod for the head of John the Immerser, because he has to give it to you, because Herod swore an oath to you. So it's pretty terrible to manipulate your daughter that way, and it's terrible that the daughter would comply with it. Verse 10, verse 9, and the king sorrowed, but because of the oaths and those reclining with him, he ordered it to be given. So Herod keeps his oath, but he sorrowed. He didn't want to kill John the Immerser. And that's the sort of damage an oath can do. It also says that Herod complied with the request because of those reclining with him. And once again, Herod does not want to lose face. He's at this party with all of these higher-ups, and he just publicly announced, I will give you anything you want. And he swore an oath. So if he backed off from that, it would look really bad. And so once again, the fear of man comes into play here. He didn't want to look bad. So he agrees to behead John the Immerser. So he gives the order in verse 10. And having sent, he beheaded John in the prison, and his head was carried upon a platter and was given to the girl, and she carried it to her mother. And this is just a really gruesome birthday party, right? On multiple levels, as you can see. This is when wickedness has its way, this is the sort of thing that happens. But just imagine how gruesome this is. Not only a beheading, but put on a platter, as if you're presenting it to someone for them to delight in or take pleasure in. And the fact that it was given to this girl, imagine giving your young daughter a bloody head of a man, and she's going to give it to her mother at this public birthday party. So these are some gruesome, disturbing people. In verse 12, and having approached, his students took up the body and buried it, and having gone, they reported it to Jesus. So John the Immerser had his own disciples who followed him. John the Immerser did not want that. He wanted all of his disciples to migrate over to being Jesus's disciples, but some of them just stuck it out and stuck with it. And so his own disciples came and retrieved his body and gave him a proper burial. And the reason that's mentioned is because that kind of goes back to Herod's paranoia. Well, his students took away John's body, and now Herod thinks, oh, Jesus just came on the scene and he's doing all these miracles. Maybe that's John the Baptist risen from the dead. So, Herod's theory comes from paranoia, and perhaps it also comes from guilt. It comes from a fear of being found out, or a fear of being punished for what he has done. And we see this in people. We see people doing evil things, and they develop a paranoia over those things. It's perhaps a punishment from God. Maybe it's a natural consequence, a natural psychological consequence of committing sins. But John's execution sorrowed Herod, and it made him a little paranoid. So it was ridiculous to just assume he rose from the dead and was performing these miracles. But that's where Herod's mind goes to. So in Herod's mind, Jesus is kind of, he's a scary figure to him. Jesus is perhaps dangerous to Herod. And so in verse 13, and Jesus having heard, you might think this is connected to verse 12, that John's students reported that John was dead, and Jesus heard the report. But I actually think it's referring to the verse 1 of chapter 14. In that season, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus, and then we get all this background story on why Herod has this crazy theory about Jesus. So Jesus now knows that Herod knows about Jesus, and that Herod has a crazy theory about him. So Jesus reacts this way. In verse 13 it says, and Jesus having heard, withdrew from there in a boat for a deserted place in private. There's a couple of times in the Bible, but particularly Matthew, where people are persecuting someone or threatening to persecute someone, and those individuals, those targets, flee. And it's okay for that to happen. Or I should say, at least sometimes it's okay for that to happen. Jesus is not reacting out of cowardice here, but there is something about God's timing, perhaps timing in Jesus's ministry, or perhaps Jesus is applying some kind of wisdom from the Old Testament that I'm not privy to anyway. But Jesus hears this report that Herod has a paranoid theory about Jesus, and Jesus leaves that area and he goes off to be private somewhere. If you remember in Matthew chapter 2, an angel tells Joseph to take his family and flee to Egypt because Herod, a different Herod, is going to seek the life of baby Jesus. And Joseph listens to that command and flees, and wisely so. Then, in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is instructing his apostles, and he says, actually, let me go there and just read the exact quote. He says to them in verse 10:23, he says, but whenever they may be persecuting you in this city, be fleeing to the other. And then he goes on to give his reason why there, but the point I'm trying to bring up here is it's not always cowardice to flee persecution or the threat of persecution. We shouldn't fear persecution. The Bible is very clear that believers are to simply not fear anything. And that's, I think, part of our sanctification. But we do see wisdom applied in certain situations where you would say, it is God's will for me to flee persecution, even if you've just heard the report about it. And so I just wanted to comment on that. There's a time and place to flee persecution or the threat of persecution. All right, Matthew 14 and verse 13. So Jesus withdrew from there in a boat for a deserted place in private. And the crowds having heard, they followed him on foot from the cities. And Jesus, having gone out, saw a large crowd and had pity on them and healed their sick. A couple of comments here. The first one I want to say is this. Jesus seeks privacy, and he seems to not get it, or at least not in full. These people seek him out, and he has pity on them, and he heals their sick. And one of the things this tells me is, if you're seeking privacy, but other people need your ministry or your service, or they just want to be with you, I don't think you should close the door on them. Jesus, he tolerates that inconvenience, the inconvenience of, I want privacy, but I'm not getting it. And he doesn't get annoyed with that. He doesn't shoo them away. He doesn't begrudgingly help them. The text says he has pity on them and he healed their sick. So Jesus had this gift of healing, and he felt like being alone, or he wanted privacy. And this crowd didn't notice that or didn't respect that, but he didn't rebuke them or hide away from them. He gave up his privacy to go out and heal them. And so maybe there's an application there for us to, if people want or need us, to not, hang on and clench that alone time and say, it's okay to be inconvenienced. It's really not an inconvenience. I have this gift I can use to edify this person, or maybe they just want to be with me. So that's a good habit to get into, right? And that's what the Christian life is all about, laying down self for others. And that's an application of it. Laying down, I want to be alone, I want privacy, I want this, for, this person wants to be with me or needs me. That's an application of selflessness or laying down your life for another. And I think all of us are probably going to be challenged with that at one point or another. So that's one of the first observations I wanted to make about these verses. The second one is, I really admire these people, these crowds who left the city on foot to go find Jesus. So if Jesus was teaching in your local synagogue, that's kind of convenient. I mean, you're going to go to synagogue anyway, and you really wanted to hear from Jesus' mouth and maybe have him heal you or heal one of your relatives, and he's in town. So you don't even have to travel to see him. But what would happen if he had to leave your synagogue and he was out in the middle of who knows where and you had to travel to see him? It shows the effort that these people put into tracking Jesus down. And so it's just another encouragement to expend energy to get Jesus in your life. Let's look at verse 15 in Matthew chapter 14. But it having become late evening, his students approached him, saying, "The place is deserted, and the hour already gone by. Dismiss the crowds, so that having gone away into the villages, they may buy food for themselves." So Jesus is out in the middle of nowhere. He's in a deserted place. There's no civilization around. There's no Sheetz around, if you know what Sheetz is. It's like the best gas station in the world. And he's healing all these people, and it's a large crowd, it says in verse 14. But it's getting late in the day, and the disciples are a little concerned. They say, why don't you dismiss them, tell them to go into their villages and get some food? Because we don't have the food to feed them. It's getting kind of late. It's going to take them a while to get there and to get their food. Verse 16. But Jesus said to them, "They don't have need to go away. You give them something to eat." So Jesus disagrees with the disciples. He says, they don't need to leave. I can keep healing them. They can keep hearing my teaching. We don't need to send them away just because we don't have food and they're hungry and it's getting late in the day. Verse 17, but they said to him, "We aren't having anything here except 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, which is a pretty small amount for how many people there are. 5,000 men apart from women and children. So 5,000 at least, and probably a couple thousand more than that. So this is a very massive crowd. Verse 18, but he said, "Bring them here to me." If you read the other accounts of this miracle, it says in the book of John that Jesus himself knew what he was about to do. So Jesus planned or foresaw that he was going to perform this sign. And Jesus performs a lot of signs. He was destined to perform a lot of signs. In one sense, he has to perform a lot of signs because these add to his messianic credentials. These are the signs that are piling up, that are just screaming, this man is the Messiah, the Son of God. This is the man that the Old Testament scriptures predicted. He's fulfilling prophecy after prophecy after prophecy after prophecy. He keeps claiming to be the Christ and the Son of God, and then immediately performs a miracle that only God could perform. So over and over and over again, he is verifying and re-verifying he is the Christ. He's the coming King of Israel and of the whole world, and that he is the eternal divine Son of God. And here is yet another miracle written in 4 different accounts and witnessed to by 5,000 plus people that once again proves he is the Messiah. And so he performs this miracle, although it's a little bit of a different one than the ones he performed before. Verse 19, and having ordered the crowds to recline on the grass, having taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, having looked up into heaven, he blessed. And having broken them, he gave the loaves to the students and the students to the crowds. So Jesus orders all of these people to sit down. There's some language here that reminds me of shepherds and sheep, like laying down in the grass, get comfortable. He leads me by still waters kind of thing. And then he takes these 5 loaves of bread and these 2 fish, and he blesses God, looks up to heaven, blesses God, and then he breaks them. So he starts pulling them apart. Have you ever been to like a cookout or something, or some kind of banquet where there's kind of like this designated person cutting whatever? There's like a person that's cutting the cake and handing out pieces, or cutting the ham and handing out slices. That's kind of Jesus's role in this banquet. So he's the one that's taking the fish and like ripping it, or the bread, he's pulling it apart, and he gives it to the disciples, and the disciples are like the middlemen. They're like the butlers. They're taking the food from the hand of Jesus, and they're giving it to all of these people, however they did it. Oh, children first, or we'll start with this table and go over here, or, oh, we'll just, whoever needs, does anyone want any? Oh, we'll take it to you. And they just kept doing it. And at the end of it all, verse 20, and they all ate and were full. And they took up the excess of the fragments, 12 full baskets. But those eating were about 5,000 men, apart from women and children. So up until this point, Jesus really didn't perform a miracle like this one. He's been healing people. He's raised people from the dead. But he hasn't done something like this where he's fed a bunch of people with so little supplies. And that's the miracle, of course, right? 5 loaves, 2 fish, feeding however many people were there, 8,000, 9,000 people. And there were 12 baskets left over. There were more leftovers after feeding tons of people than there were at the beginning. And it says in John chapter 6, this is a parallel account, John chapter 6 and verse 14, it says, therefore the people, having seen the sign which Jesus did, were saying, this is truly the prophet coming into the world. And the prophet was prophesied in Deuteronomy, I believe it's 13. Moses said, God will raise up a prophet from among your own people who will be like me. And anyone who doesn't listen to him will be cut off. So they were looking for this prophet, and these individuals rightly ascertained Jesus is this prophet. And they knew that because of this sign. They saw how little food there was at the beginning, and how everyone had their fill, and how there were leftovers at the end. Another sign that proves the identity of Jesus, points to who he really is, the Christ, the Son of God, the prophet. All right, friends, I think that's all I had to say about this text. Grace and peace to you. Quick practical note, I fried my computer a couple of days ago, maybe even like a couple of weeks ago, and this is a new computer that I'm using right now. So now that I have a new computer, I'm hoping to resume regularly teaching again. So Lord willing, I will continue to teach through the book of Matthew. And grace and peace to you. And next time we'll pick up in Matthew chapter 14. Take care until then.